Hello, fabulous friends and fans. Welcome to Synchronicity University. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah, and this is your moment of synchronicity. This video is on Saturn in the sign of Aries or in the first house in the natal chart, and also Saturn transiting through the first house as well. So first thing, when we look at Saturn in the sign of Aries, Aries has to do with power, with breath, with self-trust, with a real trust in your own impetus, your first reaction, and with your own sense of pushing and moving and fighting for a life that you want, and thereby living it just exactly the way that you want, that truly resonates as true for you. Now, Aries is also the sign of childhood, and so usually where it comes to the Aries energy, it has to do with trusting what it is that you most wanted to do when you were young, when you were a child, those first dreams you had about what it is that you could be. Now, Saturn ultimately is about a sense of limitation, a sense of time, a sense of understanding that as much as you give is what you're going to get out of it. But also Saturn is about being real, okay? Being a kid is not about being real. Being a child is not about being real. Being a child is about dreaming. It's about having fun. It's about trusting what you want and your creativity, and whatever it is, you believe it can happen. That's the best of being a child. Well, when Saturn is here, it's almost as if, wow, you got to grow up really fast. That very thing that when you're very young you connect to, you may end up actually second guessing. You may be wondering, can I actually do this? Can I make this happen? Now, what's really great is if you do have Saturn in Aries and it is speaking harmoniously with other players in your chart, that does say that you are able to take that early dream, that early passion, and manifest it. The more positively aspected and the more power players that Saturn is speaking to, especially if it's speaking to something like Jupiter or Pluto harmoniously, it becomes that much easier to bring forward a vision from early life and to manifest it into reality. Where it is that you actually have some tough aspects playing out, some harder aspects playing out with that Saturn in Aries, it means that you have to overcome, whether it's your own doubt or your own internal struggles, your own second guessing, or maybe just messages about self-trust that might have shown up early in life. You are going to have to overcome those as part of owning a sense of agency, owning a sense of being able to move your life in a positive direction. There can sometimes feel like there's a sense of limitation, but ultimately limitations are meant to be transcended. And so with Saturn, it's about intelligently figuring out how to transcend those limitations. If you are a person with Saturn in the first house, there's a couple of ways to understand this. First of all, there's Saturn conjunct the ascendant. That's one thing. And then Saturn in the first house. So the closer that Saturn is to the ascendant, the more dominant that energy is going to be. Now, the ascendant has to do with many things. I did a series on the ascendant, but basically one of the most immediate things is the appearance, okay? It's a key point in the chart. It really has to do with how you're perceived on those first immediate meetings. The masks you learn to wear very early in life, one of the first masks you understood that you could wear for a variety of reasons, right? It might have been to navigate your early environment. It might have been to fit in. It might have just been to survive. It might have been so that you could be safe. You could keep something safe within yourself so you could feel less vulnerable, which is normally the case with Saturn. It's about being less vulnerable. So when we have Saturn on the ascendant, this tends to be a person, regardless of the sign that ascendant is in, you are going to see that Saturn. Like the more close it is, right? The tighter the orb to the ascendant, the more you're going to experience this energy. So if it is within 3 degrees, which is, sort of said to be a Ptolemaic aspect, if it's within 3 degrees of the ascendant, regardless if it's in the 1st or the 12th, that Saturn is going to really be the first thing that people see when they meet you. They're going to see somebody who's responsible, who's adult, who's mature in early life, probably looks a lot older in early life. Now, that might not last, okay? Other factors play into that. But normally, if you've got Saturn on the first house, in the early part of life, especially before the Saturn return, people tend to mistake you for being older than you actually are, because there's an energy of maturity and responsibility at a really young age. having to do with the ascendant as well. There can also be a very sort of serious approach to life in the early part of life as well. Now again, all else being equal, this can be negated significantly. If you've got Saturn conjunct the ascendant, but then you've got, you know, all this fire and air energy, then that Saturn on the ascendant can really be negated significantly. Like you might need, if you have, let's say you have the moon in Sag, which is normally thought of to be like a really happy kind of engaging energy. Well, maybe your first impression is really serious, but as soon as you get comfortable, if you got a positively aspected Sagittarius moon, then very quickly you get into that moon and people start seeing this whole other side of you. So depending on what else is happening in the chart, how long that impression lasts can vary significantly, and also depending on the environment you find yourself in as well. Saturn in the first house. So the first house ultimately is about what you most identify with. What is sort of the thing that you immediately go to when you think I am, right? When you say I am smart, I am South Asian, I am female, I am, you know, whatever that is for you, right? I am pretty, whatever that is for you. That I am is the first house. That's the most immediate identity you have. And it can be something like an attribute, right? If you've got Venus in the first house, okay, that's somebody who knows, who's going to get lots of affirmation throughout their life that they're pretty or that their beauty matters. Putting that to the side, that's for the Venus videos. Let's say you do have Saturn in the first house, but it's not necessarily close to the ascendant, okay? Close to the ascendant or not. Saturn in the first house means that this is a person for whom there might be some insecurity around the appearance, okay? There might be times in life, depending on if you're going through a tough transit with that Saturn, when you feel like this is not how I'm supposed to look, right? There'll be cycles like that that do happen. There can be a sense of having to go through these different cycles where you feel that you can't be at peace with your body for whatever reason, okay? Because the first house is very much sort of that, the body and the breath as well. It's the ascendant point from which it is said that you enter your body, right? So that's sort of the entry point. Ultimately, it is the breath that connects you to everyone and everything that is expressed in that birth chart. Saturn in the first house people, though, the thing is that these are people who actually tend to manifest a lot in their life. I think this is about the angular houses really, but I found first house Saturn people, 10th house Saturn people as well, very strongly tend to be people who, whether you want to call it that they have an insecurity, whether you want to call it that they feel they're never doing enough, they have a strong enough inner critic, and they tend to have a really strong inner critic, but normally have a strong enough inner critic to motivate them to action. So because they're critical of themselves, they feel that they should be doing more, that they're not doing enough. And so because of that, they'll actually take action, especially if that Saturn is positively aspected. Now, if that Saturn is not positively aspected, it might take that Saturn return to kick them into gear. But ultimately, these are people who end up dedicating themselves to something that matters. They understand the value of hard work on a core level. They say, I am hardworking. I am able to move past this. I am able to succeed. Even though they're really critical of themselves, they may doubt themselves more sometimes than others. These are people who are going to have that appreciation that time is limited and that they want to leave a legacy. So this is also true of the 10th house, but I'll talk more about legacy, and those matters become that much more amplified with 10th house Saturn. But Saturn as natural ruler of the 10th house brings those elements that much closer to home. And ultimately, this is about people really internalizing a sense of their self-worth by actually doing something that they feel garners them a measure of respect. Respect from others, but also a measure of self-respect as well. One really notable person, actually, I always remember when I think about Saturn in the first house, if I have the birth data correctly, I hope I do. But I remember years ago looking at a chart of Bob Marley, actually, and he had Saturn in the first house. So this is somebody who had, ultimately died of a physical challenge, probably felt like, this should not be happening. This should not be what my body is doing right now. And that doesn't mean that that's the case, right? Lots of people with Saturn in the first house live very long, very happy, very healthy lives. But also, this is a person who was really hardworking. As much as he had this image of that whole spiritual side to him that some people still really resonate with, this is a person who was really hardworking, critical of himself in his own way, and really desired to manifest something, which is why ultimately he did what he needed to do so that he could get to that place as well. Of course, there's a lot to be said for luck. I'm of that belief as well. But with Saturn, it really is about creating your own luck. And with Saturn in the first, it is about you being who it is that you need to be in order to manifest what it is that you desire. So the focus becomes on being it rather than necessarily acting like it, right? Or doing something specific. When Saturn transits through the first house, it is as if all those qualities that ultimately a person with Saturn in their natal first house experiences is like those qualities visit you for a little while. So the appearance gets, especially as Saturn crosses the ascendant, gets a lot more grown up. But really, when Saturn crosses the ascendant by transit, you got to grow up. That's really what it comes down to. In some way, there is a major turning point, awareness, moment of reality that hits that makes people go. And I've seen this again and again. The most positively aspected Saturn. Still, you're going to go, okay, taking an honest stock. This is where I've been kidding myself. This is where I got to get more serious. And from there, formulating a plan to really go forward in a much stronger sense. If you know that that Saturn is not so positively aspected, make sure that you are taking very good care of yourself, you're eating well, you're sleeping well, you're doing the things that you need to do to practice self-care, because it can feel like a stressful time, a serious time, but the good thing is that it will pass, and it tends to be most intense when Saturn is over the ascendant. Once Saturn moves into the first house, it becomes a lot more about integrating the qualities of taking responsibility for your happiness. That's what Saturn in the first house is. Taking responsibility for who you want to be and focusing on who you want to be. And from there, knowing that if you focus in on that, your reality, whatever it is in your reality that doesn't work for you, must change when you change. Well, thank you so much for watching this episode, this class in Synchronicity University. Please keep your questions, comments, feedback coming. I absolutely love them. Facebook, Twitter, Google+, my website, NadiyaShah.com, and YouTube comments as well. Truly so grateful for it. Until we connect again, take care. Thank you for watching this lesson as part of Synchronicity University. You can go online at synchronicityuniversity.com or click on your screen if you're on YouTube right now to access even more video lessons, to access horoscopes, interviews with some of the most amazing astrologers in the world, and so much more.